Beneath the fractured vault of a winter sky, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen spires of Varichold, a single flame flickered in defiance of the encroaching night. Nerissa Vale moved like a shadow through the outer wards of the castle, her breath misting in the relentless chill that clawed at the stone walls. The wind howled from the jagged peaks of the Iron Fang Mountains, carrying the distant weavos of wolves that prowled the endless white beyond. She was no stranger to this cold. It had been her companion since the day her own pack had cast her out, deeming her spirit too frail, her scent too faint for the savage rites of the full moon. An omega without fire in her veins, they had whispered, banishing her to the fringes where the rejected scraped out lives amid the snow-swept ruins. But Nerissa had learned to listen to the silence beneath the storm, to the subtle pulse of the earth that others ignored. Her hands, calloused from tending the hidden herb gardens in the castle's undercroft, clutched the frayed edge of her woolen shawl. Around her wrist, bound by a thin leather cord, hung the silver bracelet, her one inheritance from a mother lost to the birthing fires. It was no grand heirloom, just a circlet etched with the crescent phases of the moon, its metal dulled by years of neglect. Yet it warmed against her skin in the deepest frosts, a quiet reminder that some bonds endured even when flesh failed. She had polished it that morning, under the dim glow of a tallow candle, as if preparing for a summons she never truly believed would come. The guards at the inner gate eyed her with the weary disdain reserved for the lowly. "The king's desperation grows," one muttered, his armor glinting like frost under torchlight. "Even the scraps are called now." Nerissa kept her gaze lowered, her bare feet silent on the icy flags, feeling the weight of their judgment like fresh snow on her shoulders. She had served in the shadows of Varichold for 3 winters, gathering roots for the healers, mending linens stained with the blood of hunts gone wrong, but never had she crossed into the throne hall. Omegas like her were meant to fade, not to witness the glory of alphas. The corridor opened into the grand antechamber, where braziers roared with logs from the ancient yew groves, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across tapestries woven with tales of conquest. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke and iron, blood, always blood, the life force of the realm. Nerissa's heart quickened as she approached the heavy oak doors, flanked by sentinels whose eyes burned with the feral gold of their alpha lineage. A herald, his voice gravelly from the cold, announced her, Nerissa Vale, of no pack, servant of the Undercroft. The doors groaned open, revealing the throne room in all its austere majesty. Pillars of black granite rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, supporting a ceiling vaulted with constellations captured in silver filigree. At the far end, upon a dais carved from glacial ice veined with quartz, sat King Thorian Varric. His form was a study in restrained power, broad shoulders draped in a cloak of wolf pelts, his dark hair streaked with premature silver, falling like a cascade of midnight over a face etched by lines of unyielding duty. His eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, fixed on her with an intensity that made the air hum. But it was not her he truly saw. His gaze flickered to the 2 small figures beside him, pale and still upon pallets of sable fur. The twin princes, Orin and Kale, heirs to the Iron Fang throne. Their breaths came in shallow rasps, chests rising and falling like bellows, starved of air. The healers had failed them. The fever had come upon them in the night, a curse whispered to be the work of rival packs or the Deuce's own judgment on Thorian's wars. Blood stained the furs beneath them, seeping from noses and ears, a crimson accusation against the king's unyielding rule. Servants hovered at the edges, their faces gaunt with fear, while the court, nobles in fur-trimmed robes, murmured prayers to the lunar spirits. Thorian's voice cut through the tension, deep and resonant as thunder rolling over peaks. "You claim affinity with the old ways, woman. The healers speak of your herbs, your whispers to the moon. Approach, if you dare. Save them, or join the shadows you came from. Nerissa's pulse thrummed in her ears, a wild rhythm echoing the distant howls outside. She had heard the tales of the king, a warrior who had united the fractured clans through blade and pact, yet haunted by the ghosts of battles where mercy had been a luxury he could not afford. Guilt clung to him like the frost on his crown, a subtle scent beneath the musk of command. His own mark, the alpha bond that should have fortified his line, seemed dimmed, as if the Dusa had turned her face from his excesses. She stepped forward, the silver bracelet catching the firelight, sending prisms dancing across the floor. The cold stone bit into her soles, but she felt the moon's gaze through the narrow windows high above, a pale eye watching, waiting. Kneeling beside the princes, she extended trembling hands, hovering over Oren's fevered brow. The boy's skin burned like embers beneath ash, his dark lashes fluttering against cheeks hollowed by pain. Kale mirrored him, their twin bond a fragile thread fraying in the wind of mortality. In that moment, as the room held its collective breath, Nerissa felt the stirrings of something ancient within her, a gift long dormant, ridiculed by her pack as mere fancy. The bracelet grew warm, almost hot, against her wrist, and she closed her eyes, murmuring the forbidden incantation her mother had taught her under similar moons. Dusa of the veiled light, thread the silver through the dark. A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the prince's labored gasps. Thorian's presence loomed behind her, a wall of tension and unspoken plea. He had rejected so many before her, exiled healers, banished seers. But desperation was a cruel sovereign, bending even kings to the will of the overlooked. Nerissa's fingers brushed Oren's temple, and the air thickened, charged with the scent of ozone and blooming nightshade. Outside, the wind rose to a wail, as if the mountains themselves leaned in to witness. What strength lay in her touch, she wondered, if not the choice to reach despite the exile that had forged her? The moon's light filtered through the ice-laced panes, bathing the scene in ethereal silver, and for the first time, Nerissa felt seen, not as a shadow, but as the quiet force that might yet mend a breaking throne. Silver light bloomed from Nerissa's fingertips, unbidden and fierce, like the first crack of dawn piercing an eternal night. It spilled across Oren's face, weaving through the fever's crimson haze, and the boy's body arched once, a gasp tearing from his throat as if the moon itself had exhaled into him. The bracelet on her wrist pulsed with heat, its crescents glowing faintly, a secret unveiled in the heart of the throne room. Kyle stirred beside his brother, his small chest heaving as the light bridged them, mending the frayed threads of their twin bond. The air hummed with an otherworldly resonance, carrying the faint scent of wild jasmine and frost-kissed stone, echoes of ancient groves where the Dusa's priestesses once walked. Nerissa's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in the sudden silence that followed. The light faded as swiftly as it had come, leaving her hands trembling above the princes, now deep in a healing slumber, their skins cooling to a natural pallor. Color returned to their cheeks, the bloodstains on the furs darkening to mere shadows. Whispers erupted from the court, a tide of awe and accusation crashing against the pillars. "Witchcraft," one noble hissed, his hand drifting to the hilt of his dagger. "The old forbidden arts, banish her before the Dusa's wrath descends further." But Thorian's voice silenced them, a low growl that vibrated through the stone like the rumble of an avalanche. "Enough!" He rose from the dais, his cloak whispering against the ice, and stepped forward, his shadow engulfing her. Up close, the king was a tempest contained, scars tracing his jaw like lightning's aftermath, his eyes holding the weight of kingdoms lost and won. Guilt etched deeper lines there, a private war he waged against the throne's demands. He had led charges into blizzards where mercy meant death, sacrificing allies to secure borders that now crumbled under curses unseen. The fever that gripped his sons was no mere illness, it was retribution, the Deus's silver blade for a king who had prioritized iron over compassion. Nerissa met his gaze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Fear coiled in her belly, sharp as the winter wind, but beneath it stirred curiosity, a pull toward this alpha whose scent, rich with pine and storm, mingled with her own faint lunar trace. Instinct whispered of connection, the Omega's ancient call to heal the broken alpha, yet she denied it, rationalizing the warmth in her veins as mere survival's trick. She was no savior, only a castaway, her pack's rejection a brand that burned hotter than any gift. "They live," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "The moon." It answered. Thorian's hand shot out, grasping her wrist, not roughly, but with a firmness that pinned the bracelet between them. His touch was fire and ice, sending a jolt through her that blurred the line between dread and desire. He turned her hand palm up, studying the silver circlet as if it were a map to forgotten prophecies. "This," he said, his breath warm against her skin, "bears the mark of the veiled order. You are no simple servant." His eyes searched hers, probing for deceit, but finding only the raw honesty of one who had long hidden her light. The court watched, breaths held, as the king's desperation warred with his pride. He had rejected Omegas before, stronger ones, bolder scents, casting them aside for political alliances that soured like blood in snow. Yet here, in this overlooked woman, he sensed a fracture in his own armored resolve. The wind outside battered the windows, weavos rising in chorus, as if the iron-fang wolves sensed the shift. Thorian released her, but the imprint of his fingers lingered, a ghost of heat. "You will stay," he commanded, turning to the nobles, whose murmurs threatened to swell. "Until the boys wake fully, prove your gift is no illusion." It was no invitation, but a tether, born of necessity, laced with the fear that her presence might unravel the fragile peace of his rule. Rivals circled Varichold like shadows in the pines, whispering of the king's weakening line, and now this. An Omega wielding lunar magic, forbidden since the Great Schism, when Alphas claimed the Deus's power as their own. Nerissa rose slowly, the stone floor numbing her feet, and nodded, though every instinct screamed to flee back to the Undercroft's shadows. The bracelet cooled against her pulse, a quiet anchor amid the storm. As servants bustled to prepare a chamber near the royal wing, far from her accustomed gloom, she felt the weight of eyes upon her, not just the court's suspicion, but Thorian's lingering glance, heavy with unspoken questions. He retreated to his son's side, brushing a lock from Orin's brow with a tenderness that belied his warrior's frame, his shoulders slumping under the cloak of duty. What was strength, she pondered, if not choosing to trust the very exile one might have scorned? Night deepened, the moon climbing higher, its light filtering through the vaulted glass like veins of silver in marble. Nerissa was led to a sparse alcove adjoining the throne hall, its walls draped in tapestries of lunar hunts, wolves pursuing ethereal stags under eternal skies. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden flickers that danced with the bracelet's subtle gleam. She sat by the flames, wrapping her shawl tighter, the scent of burning yew filling her lungs. Exhaustion tugged at her, but sleep evaded. Instead, visions flickered, Thorian's scarred hands, the prince's revived breaths, the court's veiled threats. The connection she denied hummed beneath her skin, instinctive as the tide, curious as a forbidden path through the snow. Footsteps echoed beyond the curtain, heavy and deliberate. Thorian entered without announcement, his presence filling the space like a gathering cloud. He carried a chalice of mulled wine, steam rising in crimson curls, and set it beside her. "Drink," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the throne's edge. "You've given what no other could." He sank onto a stool opposite, the firelight etching hollows in his face, revealing the melancholy that haunted his reign. Guilt for past rejections, for omegas cast into the wilds during famines, for mercy withheld in sieges, mirrored her own exile, a shared wound unspoken. She took the chalice, their fingers brushing again, and sipped the warm spice, feeling it chase the chill from her bones. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping free like a breath in the wind. "You could have sent me away." His gaze drifted to the flames, where embers popped like distant thunder. "Because the Deusa mocks the proud. My wars have spilled blood enough to drown the rivers, yet they cannot save my own." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable, the Alpha's mask cracking under the weight of confession. Outside, a lone Weevo pierced the night, answered by the wind's mournful sigh. In that fragile refuge, as the fire warded off the encroaching cold, empathy stirred, a tentative bridge over the chasm of their worlds. Nerissa saw not the king, but the man, marked by duty's blade, and in his eyes she glimpsed her own curiosity reflected, denied yet undeniable. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The fire's embers glowed like dying stars in the alcove's hearth, casting wavering shadows that clung to the tapestries like unspoken regrets. Nerissa sat motionless, the chalice of mulled wine now empty in her lap, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the chill seeping through the stone walls. Thorian's confession lingered in the air between them, heavy as the scent of pine smoke and the faint metallic tang of the prince's earlier blood. She studied his profile in the firelight, the sharp angle of his jaw, scarred from a blade that had tasted too many throats, and the way his eyes, shadowed by duty, reflected the flame's restless dance. He was no stranger to vulnerability. It was etched into him like the silver streaks in his hair, born of choices that had fortified his throne but hollowed his soul. Outside, the wind's howl sharpened into a frenzy, rattling the narrow windows as if the Iron Fang Mountains themselves conspired to breach Varichold. Nerissa's bracelet hummed against her wrist, a subtle vibration that synced with the storm's rhythm, urging her to listen beyond the gale. She had always felt the moon's pull strongest in tempests like this, when the world stripped bare its wild heart. But now, with the king across from her, that pull twisted into something more intimate, a thread tugging at the edges of her guarded spirit. She wanted to retreat, to dissolve back into the Undercroft's anonymity, where rejection was a familiar cloak, not this dangerous proximity to power. Thorian shifted, his broad frame creaking the stool, and broke the silence. "The fever may return," he said, his voice a low rumble, laced with the Alpha's inherent command, yet softened by the night's confessions. The healer's whisper of poisons, slipped into the royal stores by spies from the Frostvale clans. My rivals grow bold, sensing weakness in my line. His gaze met hers then, piercing, as if weighing whether her lunar gift could stem a tide of betrayal. Guilt flickered there, unspoken, the memory of omegas like her, discarded in his campaigns to appease ambitious betas, their sense lost to the snows. He had built his kingdom on such sacrifices, yet now, with his sons' lives tethered to her touch, the cost clawed at him anew. Before Nerissa could respond, a distant clamor echoed through the corridors, boots on stone, urgent voices rising like sparks from dry tinder. The curtain parted abruptly, admitting a sentinel, his fur cloak dusted with fresh snow, eyes wide with alarm. "My king," he gasped, breath fogging the air. "The outer gates, assassins from the east, cloaked in the storm. They bear the Frostvale sigil, demanding audience, but their blades gleam with intent." The man's hand rested on his sword hilt, the steel whispering against leather. Thorian rose in one fluid motion, his presence expanding to fill the space, a wall of muscle and resolve. The air thickened with the scent of impending violence, sweat, iron, and the crisp bite of winter intruding. Nerissa's heart lurched, instinct flooding her veins with ice. She had no place in such wars. Her pack had exiled her precisely for her frailty in the face of fang and claw. Yet as Thorian turned to her, his expression a mask of calculated fury, she felt the bracelet warm again, its crescents pressing into her skin like a vow. "Stay with the boys," he ordered, but there was no dismissal in it, only a shared urgency, as if her presence had already woven her into the throne's fragile web. He hesitated, then added, softer, "If the light returns, guard them as you would your own shadows." The alcove emptied in a blur of motion, Thorian striding out with the sentinel, his cloak billowing like raven wings. Alone now, Nerissa hurried to the adjoining chamber where Oren and Kale lay, their small forms peaceful under layers of sable and wool. The room was a sanctuary of muted opulence, walls paneled in dark oak etched with lunar motifs, a single window framed by frost-laced iron, admitting slivers of moonlight that painted the boys' faces in silver. She knelt beside them, one hand on each brow, feeling the steady rhythm of their breaths, a miracle she had coaxed from the brink. But the storm outside raged fiercer, thunder rolling like the growl of an ancient beast, and with it came the clash of steel, faint at first, then resounding through the halls. Shouts erupted closer now, the acrid scent of blood seeping under the door like smoke from a battlefield pyre. Nerissa's pulse thundered in her ears, mingling with the distant weavos that answered the fray. She pressed her back against the bed frame, the wood cool and unyielding, and whispered the old incantation, drawing on the moon's veiled strength. The bracelet glowed faintly, casting ethereal patterns on the ceiling, a web of light that seemed to pulse in time with the prince's hearts. Fear gripped her, not just for the boys, but for the king, whose guilt she had glimpsed, whose touch had ignited a curiosity she dared not name. What was redemption, if not standing in the storm for those who had never seen you? The door burst open, and a figure stumbled in, a beta guard, clutching a gash across his arm, crimson blooming through his torn sleeve. "They're inside the inner wards," he rasped, slamming the door shut and barring it with a heavy beam, his eyes, wild with adrenaline, fixed on her. "The king fights at the breach, but they're after the heirs. Poison or blade, it matters not." He collapsed against the wall, drawing his dagger as footsteps pounded beyond, accompanied by the guttural snarls of intruders. Nerissa's mind raced, the air heavy with the coppery reek of his wound and the encroaching chill from cracks in the stone. She rose, hands steady despite the tremor in her core, and tore a strip from her shawl to bind his injury. "Hold the door," she said, her voice surprising her with its calm, born of the Undercroft's quiet trials. The guard nodded, grim determination etching his face, and she turned back to the boys, placing her palms over their chests. The light stirred within her, reluctant at first, then surging like a river breaking ice. Silver tendrils unfurling to envelop the chamber, warding it as if the Dusa herself descended. Outside, the clash intensified, Thorian's roar cut through the din, a primal challenge that shook the foundations, followed by the wet thud of bodies falling to snow-mingled blood. In that suspended moment, as the enemy hammered at the barrier, Nerissa felt the bond deepen, not just with the princes, but with the alpha beyond the fray. Empathy bloomed amid the terror, a quiet fire kindling against the cold. She had been cast out, unseen, yet here she sheltered the heart of the realm, her gift a bridge over the chasm of rejection. The guard's labored breath synced with hers, a fragile alliance forged in crisis, and through the window the moon watched, unblinking, as if affirming the choice. To heal was to claim a place, even in the shadow of thrones stained red. The assault crested and broke, the pounding fading to echoes, leaving only the wind's mournful dirge and the crackle of distant fires. Thorian entered then, bloodied but unbowed, his eyes finding hers across the room. In that gaze, denial cracked, curiosity yielding to the first stirrings of trust, a tether born not of command, but of shared defiance against the night. The throne room's vaulted ceiling seemed to press lower in the aftermath, its silver filigree constellations dimmed by the smoke that curled from the braziers like ghosts fleeing a pyre. Nerissa stood frozen beside the prince's pallets, her hands still tingling from the silver light that had warded the chamber, its residue a faint shimmer on her skin like frost under moonlight. The air hung thick with the reek of blood and scorched fur, mingling with the metallic bite of the storm's intrusion through shattered panes. Orin and Kael slept on, their breaths even now, small chests rising in unison, a fragile harmony she had woven from the Dusa's veiled threads. But her gaze locked on Thorian, who filled the doorway like a silhouette carved from shadow and iron, his cloak rent and darkened with the evidence of battle. Blood traced rivulets down his forearm, seeping from a gash that exposed the taut muscle beneath, yet he moved with the unyielding grace of an alpha unbroken. His eyes, storm-gray and fathomless, held hers without flinching, the first cracks of trust splintering the wall of command he had always worn. In that shared silence, amid the settling dust and the distant groans of wounded guards, Nerissa felt the bracelet pulse against her wrist, a living thing, its crescents warming as if the moon itself approved the tether forming between them. She had denied it in the alcove's firelight, rationalized the instinctive pull as a survivor's illusion, but now, with the echo of steel still ringing in her ears, denial frayed like the edges of her shawl. Thorian stepped forward, the stone floor crunching under his boots, each stride deliberate, closing the distance until the heat of him, sweat-slicked skin and the raw musk of exertion, washed over her. He glanced at his sons, a flicker of raw relief softening the lines of his face, then back to her, his voice a gravelly murmur that cut through the wind's lingering howl. You held them, in the heart of the breach, when blades sought their throats. It was not a question, but an acknowledgement, heavy with the weight of what it implied. He reached out, not to touch her this time, but to steady himself against the bedpost, his scarred knuckles whitening. Guilt shadowed his features, deeper now, the fever's curse, the assassin's blades, all threads of a tapestry woven from his past conquests, where mercy had been sacrificed on the altar of the throne. Nerissa's throat tightened, the cold seeping deeper into her bones despite the fire's dying embers. She had been no warrior in her exile, scavenging roots in the undercroft while packs clashed above. But in this moment, her gift had risen unbidden, a forbidden current surging through her veins. The bracelet seemed to hum louder, its silver drawing the scant moonlight that pierced the storm clouds, casting elongated shadows that danced like lunar spirits across the walls. It was the Dusa's will, she whispered, her voice steady, yet laced with the tremor of revelation. Not mine alone, the light. It comes when the broken call. She lifted her wrist slightly, the circlet catching the glow, its phases etching faint patterns on the prince's furs, a map of cycles, of hidden renewals. Thorian's gaze dropped to the bracelet, recognition dawning like the slow bleed of dawn over snow-peaked ridges. He had seen such marks in the forbidden scrolls of the Veiled Order, relics from an era when Omegas like her were not cast aside but revered as pathfinders, bearers of the moon's unyielding grace, healers who mended not just flesh, but the frayed bonds of destiny. His own alpha mark, the intricate wolf's head scarred into his shoulder from the rite of ascension, throbbed in response, as if awakening to a long-lost counterpart. Pathfinder, he breathed, the word foreign on his tongue, laden with the schism's ancient taboo. Alphas had claimed the Deusa's power centuries ago, banishing those who wielded it pure, fearing it would eclipse their iron rule. Yet here she stood, an overlooked shadow, her touch reviving his bloodline when counsels and blades had failed. The realization struck him like a blade to the gut, unraveling the melancholy that had armored his reign. He had rejected so many. Omegas bartered for alliances. Seers silenced for prophecies that challenged his wars, building Varichold on a foundation of calculated isolation. But Nerissa's gift was no mere salve. It was the key to his kingdom's survival, a lunar thread that could reweave the curses unraveling his line. The Frostveil assassins were but the vanguard. Whispers of greater betrayals stirred in the clans, rivals scenting the throne's vulnerability. Without her, the prince's revival would fade, the fever returning threefold, dragging his legacy into the abyss. With her, redemption perhaps, a chance to choose compassion over conquest, to heal the wounds his guilt had festered. Nerissa felt the shift in him, the air between them charging with unspoken possibility. Her heart raced, a wild cadence echoing the weavos beyond the walls, where wolves prowled the bloodied snow. Instinct urged her to draw closer, to let the connection bloom, but she resisted, the sting of her pack's rejection a barrier as unyielding as glacial ice. "I am no queen's counsel," she said, stepping back, though her body betrayed her with a shiver of longing. "My light is for the forgotten, not thrones." Yet even as she spoke, the bracelet flared brighter, silver light coiling up her arm like vines seeking sun, illuminating the chamber in a soft, ethereal veil. It touched Thorian's wound, the gash knitting before their eyes, crimson staunching to pink, the pain easing from his frame. He inhaled sharply, flexing his arm, wonder mingling with the ethical storm in his eyes. To bind her to his side would echo the very rejections he regretted, claiming her gift as his own, stripping her freedom for the realm's sake. But to let her go invited doom, the Deusa's judgment on a king who had spilled blood without remorse. What was destiny, if not the cruel interplay of need and choice? Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, its full orb bathing Varichold in unrelenting silver, as if demanding the revelation be acknowledged. Thorian reached for her hand then, not in command, but in plea, his touch igniting sparks along her skin. "You are the key," he murmured, voice rough with the vulnerability of a man glimpsing salvation. "Stay, not as servant, but as the moon's own emissary. Help me mend what my wars have torn." Nerissa's breath caught, the weight of his words pressing like the winter's first snow, beautiful, inevitable, burying the paths of escape. The princes stirred in their sleep, small hands twitching as if reaching for the light that had saved them, and in that instant, her hidden dom unfurled fully, a pathfinder's mantle she could no longer deny. Empathy warred with fear, the bond insistent, pulling her toward the alpha whose guilt mirrored her exile. To accept was to step from shadows into the throne's crimson glare, to refuse, to doom the innocent to the cold. The wind sighed against the stones, carrying the faint spiritual whisper of the Deusa. Redemption awaited, but only through the trial of surrender. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The throne room echoed with the hollow clamor of armored feet, the air still thick with the metallic tang of dried blood and the acrid bite of smoldering braziers. Nerissa stood at the edge of the dais, the silver bracelet a warm weight against her wrist, its crescents pulsing like a second heartbeat in the pallid light filtering through the fractured windows. The storm had broken at dawn, leaving Varichold shrouded in a crystalline hush, snowdrifts piling against the outer walls like accusations unspoken. Orin and Kale had awakened that morning, their eyes bright with the clarity of renewal, small hands clutching at her shawl as if she were the thread binding them to life. But joy was fleeting in the Ironfang realm. Shadows lengthened with the rising sun, and now they gathered, the court, the surviving guards, and Thorian at the center, his form a bastion of restrained fury. He had summoned the council at first light, his voice a thunderclap that silenced the murmurs of doubt. Nerissa lingered in the periphery, no longer a servant, but an uneasy specter, her presence a catalyst for the unrest rippling through the nobles. Whispers slithered like serpents, the Omega's light, forbidden and feral, challenging the Alpha's dominion. Thorian's guilt simmered beneath his command, a private fire fed by the realization that his wars had invited this reckoning, the Frostveil assassins mere harbingers of deeper treachery. As the doors groaned open once more, admitting a figure cloaked in frost-rimed furs, that guilt crystallized into confrontation. Lord Draven Blackthorn, Alpha rival from the eastern clans, strode in unbidden, his entourage a phalanx of betas bearing the jagged sigil of splintered pines. Tall and gaunt, with eyes like chipped obsidian, Draven carried the scent of betrayal. Pine resin and old blood, mingled with the faint rot of ambition. He had been Thorian's brother-in-arms once, bound by oaths sworn under the same moon, until the siege of Frostveil 3 winters past, where Draven's blade had turned in the blizzard's white veil, claiming lives Thorian had vowed to protect. Exiled but not broken, Draven had forged alliances in the shadows, whispering of the king's weakening line, of curses that demanded a new sovereign. Now he came not as foe, but as accuser, his gaze sweeping the room to settle on Nerissa with predatory gleam. Thorian Varric. Draven's voice sliced the silence, resonant as cracking ice. Your throne reeks of desperation. Heirs revived by an Omega's parlor tricks. The Diusa weeps for a king who clings to relics of the schism. He flung back his hood, revealing a face scarred by the same battles that marked Thorian, a mirror of what brotherhood might have been. The court shifted uneasily, fur cloaks rustling like leaves in a gathering gale, as Draven's eyes bored into her. And you, cast off from the Veil Pack, they say, rejected for your frailty, your whispers to shadows. What game do you play here, Pathfinder? Do you heal to claim or to unravel? Nerissa's breath caught, the wind outside rising in a mournful wail that echoed through the vaults. Her old pack, the Veils, who had branded her spirit too soft for the moon's savage call, flashed in her mind, faces twisted in scorn under the full orb, banishing her to the fringes with nothing but the bracelet and the chill of isolation. Draven knew her history. Spies had woven it into his web, a weapon to pry at Thorian's resolve. She felt the bracelet tighten, its silver warming against the cold knot of fear in her chest, as if urging her to speak the truth that had long festered. Freedom had been her exile's gift, a solitary path through snow-swept wilds, unburdened by bonds that demanded submission. Yet here, in the throne's crimson glare, love's shadow loomed, not the soft bloom of tales, but a tragic forge, demanding she choose between the liberty of shadows and the redemption of mending a fractured king. Thorian's hand clenched on the arm of his glacial throne, knuckles paling, the Alpha's musk sharpening with restrained rage. Guilt warred in his eyes, the betrayal of Draven's turn at Frostveil, where mercy might have saved their pact, but war's iron code had demanded exile instead. He had spilled blood to preserve the realm, rejecting overtures of peace that smelled of weakness, and now the cost circled back. His son's fever, the assassin's blades, all threads pulled by this traitor's hand. You dare enter my hall with threats? Thorian's growl vibrated through the stone, stirring distant uivos from the mountain wolves. Your poisons felled my boys. Your spies breached my gates. Speak your purpose, or taste the blade you once called brother. Draven laughed, a hollow bark that chilled the air further, stepping closer until the space between them crackled with old wounds. Purpose? To offer what you deny your people. Forgiveness for the past, a union of clans under a stronger hand. Your wars have bled us dry, Thorian. Release the Omega. Let her light fade into the wilds where rejects belong. Or war it is. My Frostveil host gathers at the passes, ready to claim the heirs you cannot protect. His gaze flicked to Nerissa again, calculating as if she were the fulcrum. Join me, little shadow. Your pack awaits. Redemption in the Veils, not this gilded cage. The words struck like fangs, reopening the scar of rejection. Nerissa's heart thundered, the bracelet flaring hot, silver light coiling faintly up her arm, illuminating the tapestry's lunar hunts in ethereal strokes. She could flee, slip into the storm's embrace, reclaim the freedom of the overlooked, leaving Thorian to his throne's devouring maw. Love was no reward here. It was a chain, binding her gift to his guilt, demanding she forgive the alphas who had cast her aside, who now vied for her power. But in Thorian's eyes, she saw the mirror of her own dilemma. His choice to forgive Draven's treason might avert bloodshed, yet war's shadow loomed, threatening the prince's fragile peace. What was strength if not choosing mercy amid the blade's edge? The moon's light pierced the clouds outside, bathing the room in silver veins, as if the Dusa posed the question to them both. Nerissa stepped forward, her voice emerging steady, laced with the quiet fire of one who had forged resolve in exile. The light does not serve thrones or traitors. It mends what is broken, if the heart allows. Her words hung, a moral gauntlet thrown, forcing Thorian to confront the war within. Forgive the past and risk betrayal anew, or unleash the fury that had built his realm on bloodied snow. Draven's sneer faltered, the air thickening with the scent of impending fracture, pine, iron, and the spiritual hush of destiny's crossroads. Thorian's hand hovered near his sword, guilt etching deeper lines, as the wind howled a spiritual dirge, demanding the choice that would either unite or shatter the Iron Fang legacy. In that suspended breath, Nerissa felt the pull tear at her core, love's redemption a path through fire and frost, freedom a solitary veil against the storm. The bracelet burned brighter, a symbol of the judgment unfolding, as the court's eyes turned, waiting for the Alpha's verdict, and with it, her own unspoken surrender. The throne room's air thickened into a suffocating veil, the silver moonlight slicing through the fractured panes like accusations from the Dusa's unblinking eye. Nerissa's words lingered, a fragile incantation amid the rising tide of tension, her bracelet searing against her wrist as if the crescents themselves etched the moral fracture unfolding. Draven's sneer twisted into a predatory grin, his obsidian eyes glinting with the cold calculation of one who had long feasted on betrayal's scraps. The court nobles shifted like shadows in the periphery, their fur-trimmed robes whispering secrets of divided loyalties, some drawn to Thorian's iron resolve, others tempted by Draven's promise of a realm unbound by guilt's heavy chains. The scent of pine resin from the intruder's cloak clashed with the iron tang of spilled blood from the night's breach, a volatile brew that set Nerissa's senses alight, her pulse echoing the distant weavos that clawed at Varikold's stones. Thorian rose from his glacial throne, a colossus of restrained fury, his broad frame casting elongated shadows that swallowed the dais. Blood from his earlier wound had crusted along his arm, a stark reminder of the wars that had forged him. Sieges where he had chosen conquest over clemency, exiling brothers like Draven to the frozen wilds rather than risk the throne's fracture. Guilt coiled in his chest like a serpent, its venom the faces of the fallen. Omegas bartered away, packs shattered for borders redrawn in crimson snow. Now, with Nerissa's light illuminating the rot, that guilt demanded reckoning. His gaze flicked to her, stormy and searching, the instinctive bond pulling at him. A tether of empathy born in the alcove's fire, now tested in this crucible. To forgive Draven might mend the clans, averting the war that loomed like thunderheads over the Iron Fang passes. But it would echo his past failures, inviting the traitor back into the heart he had bled to protect. War, then, would preserve his line, yet doom the fragile peace her touch had gifted his sons. You speak of forgiveness as if it were a blade you wield cleanly, Thorian rumbled, his voice a low avalanche, stepping down from the dais until he stood toe-to-toe with Draven. The air hummed with alpha dominance, their scents clashing like storm fronts, Thorian's pine and thunder against Draven's wrought-edged ambition. At Frostvale, you turned your steel on our own, spilling blood for a crown you never earned. My wars were for unity, not your greed. Now you slink here, poisoning my heirs, breaching my gates, and dare invoke the Diusa? His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, the ancient blade humming faintly, as if sensing the ethical precipice. Outside, the wind rose in a spiritual wail, carrying the faint, ethereal chime of distant temple bells, echoes from the lunar shrines where pathfinders once communed, now forbidden ruins haunted by the schism's ghosts. Draven's laugh scraped like ice over stone, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of unease, darting to Nerissa as if she were the unraveling thread in his web. Unity. You built a cage of iron and exile, casting shadows like her into the cold. The Veils rejected her for weakness. Why chain her to your crumbling throne? Join me, Thorian, as brothers once sworn. Forgive the past, wed your line to mine, and let the Omega fade. Or watch your kingdom burn in the passes, your boy's light snuffed by my host. He extended a gauntleted hand, the gesture a mocking olive branch, scarred from the same battles that had bound and broken them. The court murmured, a tide of temptation. Forgiveness could heal the clan's fractures, ending the cycle of blood feuds that had claimed too many winters. But Nerissa felt the lie in it. The traitor's heart a void where compassion should beat, his offer a velvet noose for the overlooked. Her breath came shallow, the bracelet's heat spreading through her veins like liquid silver, stirring the dormant fire of her exile. Freedom had been her solace in the Undercroft's gloom, solitary paths through snow-choked forests, unbound by packs that demanded submission, alphas who saw only frailty in her lunar whispers. To choose Thorian meant surrendering that liberty, weaving her gift into his guilt-ridden reign, loving not as reward, but as redemption's forge, mending the king who mirrored her rejection, yet risking the chains of a throne stained red. The princes stirred in their alcove beyond the heavy curtains, Oren's small whimper piercing the din like a plea from the Diusa herself. Nerissa's heart fractured, love's pull insistent, a visceral ache blooming in her core, rationalized as duty to the boys, yet undeniable in the way Thorian's presence ignited her senses. The warmth of his skin beneath the blood, the melancholy depth in his eyes that echoed her own shadowed spirit. She stepped into the fray, the stone floor biting cold against her bare feet, her shawl slipping from shoulders tensed like bowstrings. "Forgiveness is no crown for traitors," she said, her voice emerging clear and resonant, laced with the moon's quiet authority. The bracelet flared, silver light coiling up her arm in luminous tendrils, bathing the room in ethereal glow that made the nobles recoil. It touched Draven's outstretched hand, and he jerked back as if burned, his face paling beneath the scars. "You poisoned innocence for power, as my pack poisoned me with scorn. The Diusa demands truth, not pacts forged in deceit." The light extended, weaving toward Thorian, brushing his sword hand, a gentle insistence, urging mercy not as weakness, but as the Alpha's true strength, to forgive without forgetting, to choose unity over the solitude of endless war. Thorian's breath hitched, the ethical storm raging in his gaze as he met hers. Guilt warred with resolve, the faces of Frostvale's dead flashing before him, Draven's blade among them. Yet the path of vengeance would orphan his sons anew, spilling rivers of blood that no lunar light could staunch. To embrace war meant preserving his rule, but at the cost of the empathy she had awakened, the bond that promised redemption beyond iron thrones. "Brother no more," he growled finally, his voice cracking like thunder yielding to rain, sheathing his sword with deliberate slowness. "Exile again, Draven. Take your host and fade into the wilds, or face the Deuce's judgment in steel." It was forgiveness twisted into boundary, a moral compromise born of her light, mercy granted, but freedom for the realm demanded in return. Draven's eyes widened, betrayal twisting his features, and he snarled, signaling his betas to retreat, the phalanx melting into the shadows as the wind howled their departure. The court exhaled collectively, the tension fracturing into uneasy relief. But Nerissa felt no victory, only the deeper dilemma etching her soul. Thorian's choice mirrored her own unspoken trial. Love as a bridge over freedom's chasm, binding her to this alpha whose guilt she alone could heal, yet threatening to eclipse the solitary moon she had claimed in exile. He turned to her then, his hand reaching out, fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent silver sparks dancing between them. The bracelet cooled, its light fading to a subtle pulse, but the spiritual weight remained, the Deusa's whisper lingering in the hush. What was destiny, if not the courage to choose the wound that mended all? Outside, the moon dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows that promised trials yet to crest. As the first flakes of new snow whispered against the stones, a veil over choices that would either redeem or renounce. The throne room's hush deepened into a sacred stillness, the silver moonlight receding like a tide that had revealed the bones of old choices beneath Varichold's frost-veined stones. Nerissa's hand lingered in Thorian's grasp, the silver bracelet a conduit of warmth where their skins met, its crescents etched with the faint glow of a gift now fully claimed. Draven's retreat echoed in the corridors like the fading growl of a defeated beast, his beta's footsteps swallowed by the gathering snow that blanketed the passes beyond. The court dispersed in whispers, nobles casting sidelong glances laced with awe and resentment, shadows retreating before the lunar light that had tipped the scales. But in the heart of the dais, where the glacial throne loomed like a sentinel of forgotten winters, the true judgment unfolded, not in steel or exile, but in the quiet unraveling of souls long scarred by rejection's blade. Nerissa felt the pull intensify, a visceral tide rising in her core, the Omega's instinct no longer deniable, but a roaring current that drowned her rational shores. Thorian's touch anchored her, his fingers rough from years of wielding iron, yet gentle now, tracing the bracelet's edge as if mapping the phases of his own fractured heart. Guilt still shadowed his eyes, a storm-gray depth where the weight of Frostvale's betrayal mingled with the fresh mercy he had extended, exile over death, Unity's fragile seed planted amid the bloodied snow. He had chosen compassion not for power's sake, but because her light had illuminated the cost, wars that orphaned heirs, alphas who cast omegas into the wilds like chaff to the wind. "You turned the tide," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones, carrying the scent of pine and fresh-spilled resolve. Not with words alone, but with the moon's truth. What have I wrought, Pathfinder, that you stand here, unbound yet tethered? She withdrew her hand slowly, the separation a pang sharper than the winter's bite, her bare feet numb against the cooling stone. The bracelet cooled in response, its silver dimming to a subtle gleam, but the spiritual echo remained, a whisper from the Deusa, urging the final crossroads. Freedom had been her exile's crown, a solitary vigil in the Undercroft's gloom, where she tended roots and whispered to shadows unheeded by packs that prized fang over grace. To bind herself to Thorian meant sacrifice, her gift, once hidden and free. Now the realm's salvation, woven into a king's redemption at the price of her shadowed liberty. Love bloomed not as a gentle thaw, but as a tragic forge, tender in its pain, demanding she heal the alpha whose guilt mirrored her own rejection, choosing union over the moon's solitary embrace. The prince's alcove curtain stirred faintly, Orin and Kale's laughter filtering through like the first cracks in glacial ice, their revived vitality a testament to the light she had unleashed. Yet even that joy carried the specter of fragility. Without her, the fever's curse might coil back, dragging the bloodline into eternal frost. Outside, the wind sighed a benediction, carrying the distant weavos of Ironfang wolves, guardians of the peaks. their calls a chorus affirming the night's rebirth. Nerissa turned toward the shattered window, where snowflakes danced in the moon's waning light, each crystal a symbol of choices crystallized, power's iron grip or compassion's silver vein. Thorian followed, his presence a wall of heat against the encroaching cold, his cloak whispering as he draped it over her shoulders. The wolf pelts enveloped her, heavy with his scent, musk and storm, laced with the faint copper of healed wounds, a union unspoken yet insistent. "I have spilled rivers of blood for this throne," he confessed, his breath misting against her hair, "rejecting mercy as weakness, casting souls like yours into the void. But in your light, I see the wound I carry. A king without grace, heirs without a future. Stay, Nerissa, not as captive, but as the moon's equal. Mend me as you mended them. Let destiny be our forge, not our chain." Her heart fractured open, the emotional texture raw and unrelenting, the chill seeping through her soles, the fire's dying crackle in the braziers, the spiritual hum of the bracelet syncing with the pulse of the realm. Faith warred with despair. The Deuce's path, a revelation of rebirth, where rejection transmuted into destiny's quiet sovereignty. She had been born to heal such wounds, the Pathfinder's hidden mantle unfurling like wings long clipped, yet acceptance demanded surrender. Freedom's veil lifted for the compassion that crowned the fallen. Turning to face him, she met his gaze, the storm in his eyes yielding to a vulnerability that mirrored her own. Melancholy alphas and overlooked omegas, bound by the moon's inexorable pull. "Love is no throne's prize," she whispered, her voice steady amid the inner tempest. "But redemption's fire, burning away the old scars. I choose you, not for power, but to heal what the wilds could not." In that instant, the bracelet flared one final time, silver light blooming between them like a lunar aurora weaving through the air to envelop their forms. It touched Thorian's scars, the ancient marks of battles past softening under its glow, guilt's iron grip easing into forgiveness's quiet strength. He drew her close, his arms a bastion against the wind's mournful dirge, their breaths mingling in a rhythm as primal as the wolves' chorus. The light extended beyond, threading toward the alcove where Orin and Kale stirred, their small forms bathed in ethereal silver, a family's rebirth, the bloodline fortified not by conquest, but by the Omega's grace. Nerissa felt the union seal within her, a visceral warmth chasing the exile's chill. Destiny embraced, not as fate's yoke, but as freedom's true revelation, love as the ultimate choice, transcending hierarchies in the Deuce's veiled light. As dawn's first blush pierced the horizon, painting the snow in hues of rose and gold, Varicold stood renewed, its spires defying the endless white. Thorian pressed his forehead to hers, a silent vow etched in the silence, while the moon faded, its work done. In the heart of winter's embrace, rejection had birthed royalty, the silver bracelet a eternal witness to the flame that redemption kindled anew. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.